Connecticut took its time to adopt early voting, but it is finally about to arrive for all eligible voters in Connecticut. And early voting is all about having your say at the polls on your day. And although it's not a new concept, it's certainly new to Connecticut, so I'm so happy to be here today with the governor and lieutenant governor to get all of Connecticut's voters ready and geared up for early voting. Early voting is available for every eligible voter. It is in person, but it won't be at your same polling location. And our office has been working diligently with registrars and town clerks all year to make sure that early voting is just as safe and secure as all other forms of voting. And Election Day is still happening as it always has, Tuesday, November 5th at your regular polling place, but early voting provides voters with an additional 14 days to cast their ballot prior to the election, beginning Monday, October 21st through Sunday, November 3rd. So yes, that includes 2 full weekends, 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays to cast your vote. And the hours will be 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. most days, with extended hours on October 29th and October 31st from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now, the process for early voting will feel a little familiar to most voters who vote in person, but there are some differences. Every town will have at least one early voting location, so be sure to check your town's website or the state's website at myvote.ct.gov to find out where your early voting location will be. And the other difference is, after you vote, instead of just putting your ballot into the tabulator machine, you'll put it inside an envelope and you'll seal it and sign it and place that in the secure receptacle. And none of those votes will be counted until Election Day. And for me, I'm really happy that we finally arrived at this moment, because it's been really gratifying for me to see how the entire state has pulled together to make sure we had a successful rollout of early voting. We have had hundreds of partnerships and are created with our office, from business owners to media outlets to individuals and grassroots organizations to help get out the word. And we were a little nervous that we'd have a poll worker shortage, but this year over 2,800 people have signed up to serve as poll workers. And I would be remiss if I did not mention all of the hard work that our state's registrars and town clerks have put in, many of them without any additional pay, working tirelessly and, as I said, collaboratively and diligently across party lines, across areas of state, to make sure that early voting rolls out successfully. So without further ado, I will introduce someone who is not a stranger to protecting our state's elections, former Secretary of State and current Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz.
Well, Madam Secretary, thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. It's so exciting to be here with the Governor and Madam Secretary to remind voters that this year there is another way to vote. There is a third option because in 2022, voters overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment to allow early voting, which almost every state has. So on top of the November 5th Election Day voting, as usual, we have that option, or there's the option to apply for an absentee ballot and return that ballot by mail, or put it in the white box at your town hall. But what's exciting for today, and what we wanted to remind the voters of Connecticut about, is that there will be 14 days of early voting prior to November 5th. And it's very exciting because starting this coming Monday, October 21st, everybody has the ability to cast their ballot early. And as Madam Secretary mentioned, in most towns, the early voting location is at the town or city hall. So if you have any questions about where that is, call your town hall and they'll tell you where that early voting location is. The Secretary and I were at UConn, and early voting is going to be happening at the UConn bookstore for students that are on campus. But we wanted to remind voters that this is the first presidential election in Connecticut where we will have early voting, and so many people vote in presidential elections in our state. We wanted to give families the opportunity to balance their work and family and professional commitments and give them the opportunity to choose when it was best for them. So when voters go out to vote for every office, from president to legislature to Congress to Senate to probate judge, you'll have the opportunity to early vote. And all the locations will be open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And on October 29th, there will be extended hours of early voting that go 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Same extended hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. will be on October 31st. Voting is the perfect Halloween treat. So remember to bring your ID to your polling location, and if you miss the last day of early voting, which is on November 3rd, remember on November 5th the polls are open between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. on Election Day. We started this press conference talking about the constitutional amendment. That's the one that passed in 2022 to allow early voting. And I want to end on a reminder to voters that there is a constitutional amendment question on the ballot. On most ballots, that question will appear right above the presidential candidates. On a few ballots, it will be on the reverse side. So just a reminder to voters, make sure you weigh in on the absentee ballot question. So check out myvote.ct.gov if you need any information, or call your registrar of voters or town clerk. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our Governor, Ned Lamont.
Well, thank you. We got a current and former Secretary of State. I think everything's covered. I feel like this PA system, I can talk to Rentschler Field. I'll just say we're doing everything we can to make it easier and more convenient for you to be able to vote. That's what early voting is all about. You know, here's Connecticut joining a vast majority of the other states. Easier for you to vote. You can start next week. You can do it on weekends. Take advantage of it. And your vote matters, especially this year. It's going to be some very tight elections. Your vote matters. And as Susan said, there's also on the ballot no excuse absentee. Take a look at that as well. I want people to have the confidence, though, they can vote and vote on their schedule, not necessarily ours. And I also want to say one other thing. There's a lot of loose talk out there in the campaign world. I think sometimes it could have the effect of discouraging people from voting. You know, talk about mass deportations and police and even military. It could get busy on Election Day. If you have don't have any concerns. That's just folks trying to discourage you from voting. But you can vote next week. You can vote on Monday. You can vote next weekend. Take advantage of it. You can do it on your schedule at your time. But it's a big deal. Your vote really matters. I used to take my kids into the voting booth. You did the same thing, right, Susan, Stephanie? And what it means to cast your vote, make a decision that's really going to impact the future of the state and our country. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you both for being here today. We will be issuing a press release later today, but I also wanted to mention a few resources available to voters to help them exercise their right to vote. We have a digital voter guide available, which lists not only all the candidates on the ballot, but also all of the details around how to find your polling place, how to register, if you need extra help at the polls because of a physical disability, and so on. And all of that can be found at myvote.ct.gov, and I am happy to answer questions.
The governor mentioned sort of the security issues, whether they're unfounded or not. But is early voting something that should reassure people that any nervousness? This is the first time in my career I've seen polling questions about what people's expectations are as far as political violence or disruption.
I do think people have concerns, as you said, whether real or imagined. But what I've heard again and again is that many people just prefer to vote in person, whether because they've always done it that way or they just like to see their ballot go somewhere. So early voting gives all of those people another opportunity to vote in person and not risk not being able to vote because some life event or emergency happens on election day.
And is this the same as an AB ballot? Are there two envelopes?
No, there is a lot of confusion out there. Early voting is not like absentee voting. As you know, in the state of Connecticut, you can only vote by absentee if you meet one of 6 very specific criteria, and it can be done through the mail or via Dropbox. Early voting is only in person. It is open to every eligible voter. And the ballot goes into a single envelope that is sealed and signed and placed into the receptacle, much like your ballot was, and then that is stored until Election Day.
So what would you say to anybody who's nervous about signing a ballot and that a worker's going to be able to see how you voted?
Well, that is no different than an absentee ballot in that regard, meaning you currently sign your absentee ballot envelope, but like absentee ballots, when those envelopes are open, the ballot is put aside and they are run through the tabulator separately. So they're not tied together when they're counted.
Mark, could I just stay on your security question? One of the great things about Connecticut's voting system is for a close election, you can always examine each individual ballot, and there's a public hand counting process to review every ballot. And that's why people should feel very secure about the way we vote, because there is a piece of paper as evidence of every person's ballot.
Yeah, it's a good point. Some of this security talk stemmed from the fact that some states had moved away from paper ballots in recent years, but they are all coming back, and Connecticut, of course, has always had a paper trail in the form of a paper ballot.
And we've also always had local counting. So to the Secretary's point, you know, in past elections, secretaries that had centralized counting had issues with security, and there were questions about whether the Secretary of the State was somehow changing the results. We have local counting, so each municipality does their own, and that reduces the risk of security threats.
Yeah, and just to put a point on that, again, I think many people see national news stories and they don't realize it's very different here in Connecticut because we run our elections at the municipal level, not the county level. In some jurisdictions across the country, as the Lieutenant Governor just said, people are transporting ballots to a central county location. But here in Connecticut, we're doing all of that counting, recounts, and so on in the local municipality. So it's quite different. Any other questions? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Good job.
I was good to see you.